If you're watching this video right now, I'm going to assume you're one of two groups of people. Either A, you started wrapping the parts of the inside of your car for maybe the first time and have got to a piece that's a little bit more complex and thought to yourself, how the hell do I do that? Or you're like me and you're thinking about doing it for the first time and you spend lots and lots of time researching how you're going to do it before you do it. Either way, we're going to answer some of the easiest questions about how you would figure out how to wrap a more complex piece like this in a material like Alcantara, which doesn't stretch. Really, what we're trying to do is figure out where the hell do we place a seam. Now, I'm going to be using Alcantara for my demonstration of this because it's one of my favourite materials to use. But if you're using leather or suede, chances are the process is very much the same. And it's the fact that these materials don't stretch, which is why this problem exists at all. If you were doing this with say a cheaper suede or a faux Alcantara, sometimes they do have a little bit of stretch in them. And then that gives you a lot more ease when it comes to doing something like a two-directional interior curve like this, because you can lay it into that section and have it naturally stretch out. It's like when you're doing a vinyl wrap of a piece, which this is just some that I've laid down on the number plate holder for my 350Z. So this is another side point, a preview of the colour that my Z is going to be. When you get to the corners, you can just stretch, apply heat, and lay it down smoothly over the corners. With fabric, you can't really do that. Some stretch fabrics you can kind of do it and glue it, and sometimes it'll lift, sometimes it'll be fine. It really depends how much stretch is in your material. But if you're using a non-stretch material like this Alcantara, especially like a backed Alcantara, like this is the one I like to use because it just lays a little bit more smoothly. It doesn't show all the bumps and things quite as much. It has absolutely no stretch in either direction, so you can't allow for it around corners. What we therefore need to do is figure out where the seam is going to go, and often there are a lot of different solutions. I'm going to give you a crude example before we actually get onto the piece. What if I wanted to wrap this square box, or a corner of this square box, with a piece of paper? It's an extreme example, but this has absolutely no stretch, and you've got to decide how the seam is placed in order to allow you to cover it completely and it not pucker or twist or stretch or anything like that. Now, there's obviously a number of ways we could do this. We could cut one square piece which goes on the end, then have the other piece work around the outside edge, and that would be our seam around there, and that would be nice. We could do it sideways. We could have one piece with like a U shape that goes around in one direction, and then another one on the top that goes around here. Again, these are all just ones that use the natural material against the corner. But what if I wanted both these top edges not to have a seam on it and just have one seam down the side? Well, what we could do is bend it down one side, bend it down the other side, and see where they join. Then we're left with this leftover bit. That leftover bit is then removed, you just cut it off, and then the two side bits here can join. This is a process that's known as creating a dart. So what you would usually do, this is something that happens a lot in clothes, is that corner piece that we've been left with there is folded inside like that. These two edges are sewn together down the inside of there, and you're left with a right angle corner that goes over your box. That's known as a dart. That's quite a cool way of doing it. So then when we look at a piece of trim, and there are multiple ways that you could cover this, and there are multiple ways that you could put the seam in. What you're trying to do when you're finding out where the seam goes is A, where can each piece lay flat with no creasing or puckering? B, where would the seam look aesthetic? And C, do you need to consider anything about the material itself? For example, with Alcantara, it has a nap, it has a direction. So when you have it the right way, one of the directions, there we go, pushing it upwards there, makes it look darker. And putting it down makes it look lighter. Which means it has a nap, it has a direction, and typically you're going to want those naps to run in the same direction as much as possible. Now in my 350Z, which this is from, the nap runs from the front of the car to the back of the car. So technically, if I stroke all of the Alcantara down the dashboard, down the doors, across the ceiling, and down the back of the car, it'll all lay flat in the same direction. Probably something you want to think about. So with something like this, where are we going to put the seam? And I'll give you a second just to think about it before I reveal how I would do it. Because there are probably 3 different methods that you could go for, and each one would probably have a varying level of success and aesthetic prettiness. Okay, time's up. Have you made your decision? The answer for me is following the high point here all down to here. So one seam here. So then this entire top piece will be flat, and this curve over the top is simple because it's just going in the same direction. It doesn't require any stretching. And then one other piece here where the nap on this underside runs in the same direction, and then it rotates and is so the nap will be coming up here. So it'll kind of flow in the same way, and it'll be going down here. So there'll be the slight bit there, but that's not really a problem. Now, if you were going to be really particular about your nap, you could put a second seam in here on the inner crease, and then you could have a small piece of Alcantara there, and then a larger piece here. So it would become a 3-piece. That would be totally up to you. But I like to try and keep it as smooth and minimal as possible. So we're going to create it with one seam that runs all the way down there. Let me show you what that looks like. One other thing that's a good idea to do is add these little notch lines along your seam as you go. I tend to put them at the ends, in the middle of each of the corners, at the kind of like the ends of the curves, and then just a couple of times along the straight. What these will do is act as markers for where you sew everything together and make sure that nothing moves out of place when you actually are later down the line and constructing this thing. So we've got to this point, we now know where our seam's going to be. How do we take it from this template base and put it onto our material? The answer to that is double-sided tape. So let's see how we use that to transfer the pattern. So you're going to want to grab yourself some double-sided tape. The thick, elasticy stuff is best. Don't go out and buy really strong 3M adhesive tape because it's going to be too permanent. You actually want something that's just cheap and easy to remove because it's supposed to be a temporary solution. Then what we're going to do is just run it all the way along one side of the seam, keeping it a millimetre or so away from the edge of the seam. What we're trying to do is just edge it all the way along the seam so that we make sure the entire thing is covered. Once the tape is down, we can peel off the backing, and then we're going to be ready for the next bit. We're going to take our material. In this case, we're working with Alcantara, like I said, and we're considering the direction of the nap before we lay it down. So we're going to put it down, sticking it to the double-sided tape and making sure that it's laid out quite taut, but not like tight. So not loose and baggy, just as it is going to lie when we are stretching it out over the actual finished piece. You should be trying to minimize any wrinkles that are in the material and making sure that it's as flat and consistently spaced out as possible. Then we can flip up the underside of the material and using the same metallic permanent marker, mark exactly where the seam is by running it along the double-sided tape that we've just laid down. What we're also going to want to make sure we do as we do this is mark all the positions of the notches in relation to the notches that we've made on the actual item. Now there are obviously going to be some shapes of pieces that this doesn't work and you're not able to get on the underside to draw that line. But for the most part, you should be fine. I've not actually ever come across a piece of trim where it wasn't possible to access where I needed, so you should be fine. When you've done the entire thing, you can remove it and just check that the line is nice and consistent and smooth how you would expect it to be. If you've got a few wiggles here and there, you might want to just go over them again, just to create a line of best fit that is smooth and follows the shape that you expect it to. Also, if you have any problems seeing your notches, just double down on them. Make sure you've got that all highlighted. Then in this instance, I want to reuse a bit of this material, so I'm just going to rough cut it out. A quite exciting moment for me as a upholstery person is I've just been given this new pair of Gingine 10-inch upholstery scissors and I hadn't used them until this first cut, and it was interesting to see how smoothly they cut through Alcantara. Very, very good. This is not sponsored or anything, but these are available, I believe, on Amazon. They're not all that expensive, but they are fantastic upholstery scissors. So if you want to do a lot of work, get yourself a good pair of upholstery scissors. You cannot go wrong with a good 10 inches. Then what we're going to do, well, I've lost my train of thought now. Then what we're going to do is repeat the process on the other side of the seam. So again, going to lay down the adhesive tape, and this time I'm actually going to put almost like a tacking stitch, basically an extra piece of adhesive in the deepest part of the crease. What that's going to allow me to do is make sure that when I'm laying down the piece of material, it goes all the way into that corner and isn't raising up, and means I'm going to cut the correct shape when I get to do that part. Again, the same as we did in the first part, we're going to just flip up the edge and draw the seam line in place exactly where it should be, making sure that we add the notches on there as we go. And then when we're done, just remove everything and we've got our two very basic drawn out patterns. As you can see from the inside bit in particular, sometimes the shape isn't what you expect. And that's kind of the point. I don't think I would have guessed that it was this shape along the seam line. If I imagined how it was going to be, I would have thought it was a straight line or an L shape. So seeing that it's not in line with what I expected it to be is exactly why we go through this process. Whatever you do, do not cut out these lines because you will be cutting them out in the wrong place. We need to add a seam allowance. What a seam allowance does is gives us an amount of material that we have left over that is inside of the seam. Now, I'm not from one of the two countries that is stuck still using the imperial system, but my sewing machine is. And unfortunately, most sewing machines still use inches for their allowances that are baked onto the plate of the machine. So I am forced to do everything with 1/2 inch, but I'm not going to kick myself too hard for about having to use the imperial system for this one element of my life, other than driving at miles per hour. But this is the UK, we have a weird combination of systems. So what we're going to do is add a 1/2 inch seam allowance along the inside of all of our seams. I have a dedicated tool for this. This is a sewing gauge. It around the edge has lots of different sizes which are predefined in various fractions of an inch, but you could just use a ruler or you could just use a piece of paper where you've marked 1/2 inch tabs on it. Whatever, doesn't really matter. Just make sure that you're marking 1/2 inch all the way along the inside of the seam. Once we've done that on both sides, we cut them out. Again, nice for me because I get to use my fancy new scissors. And then, just to make the alignment of the next step a little bit easier, all of those notches, we're just going to cut these little V triangles out. It'll just help with the alignment in the next stage. Some people, when sewing, like to use pins. I prefer to use these little clips. I work with a lot of leather and a lot of suede. You can't really put needles through them. You could do it with Alcantara, but force of habit. And I find these are just a little bit easier and quicker to put on and off. So what we're trying to do at this step is bring the two sides together and align all of those little snips that we've made. Now, along the straight edges, that should be pretty simple, but what you'll find is round the corner, one of the sides will naturally start to bunch. What you're trying to do is relax and ease the materials together in such a way that as the long outside part goes around the outside of the curve, there's no bunching. So you might have to just fiddle with it until you feel that it's all nice and flat. Unfortunately, it's one of those things that no matter how well I try and describe it to you, actually getting your hands on and feeling how the materials lie against each other and how they bunch around corners when you're doing that inverted process, it doesn't have the same effect. So really just get your hands on it and try it. You'll be able to generally feel that the outside longer edge will want to turn inwards, and once you get it right, it'll all just lay flat. And that's what you're looking for. So lay that flat and then get a few clips on there just to hold everything in place. Then when it's all clipped, we've just got to sew it. I'm using this Jones sewing machine from the 1960s. It's a good middle ground semi-industrial sewing machine, which is great for materials like leather and suede and Alcantara without having a massive standalone industrial machine, which I did have and then sold because I didn't think I would need it anymore when my life was going in a different direction. But I ended up doing upholstery again in a different format to what I was doing it before. But anyway, I will have my Juki back at some point. Yes. But until then, I'm using this Jones machine. Like I say, it's a semi-industrial and it's got a walking foot. It is great for doing these more difficult materials, and being a walking foot, it will mean it holds the material together a bit better as it's stepping through your different stitches. The machine has a 1/2 inch calibration line on it, and that's what we're just going to be aiming for. So keep the material outside edge against that 1/2 inch calibration line. Basically means that as we're going round and sewing the seam, we're keeping it consistently at 1/2 inch. And that, because we added 1/2 inch on, and now we're taking 1/2 inch away, we've ended up sewing back on that original line that we drew. With it all sewn together, we're effectively done. Now, we're obviously not done. What we're going to probably want to do in order to finish it properly is create an open seam out of this, which is where you take these two inside parts of the seam and fold them outwards all the way along the seam. You can just put a little bit of glue on the outside there and fold them and glue them down. That will create what's called an open seam, and it means it will lie flatter on the other side, which is what we want to achieve. But then, if you wanted, you could just take it, align the notches to the markings that you've got on your plastic. You could then start by gluing this line down in place and making sure that that line is nice and taut and well spaced all the way along the plastic, and then simply use a spray adhesive, contact adhesive, stretch out the rest, create the tension that you want, because the tension is the thing that's going to hold it all in place, much like when you're doing vinyl wrap. Tension is important. Now I've got a couple of extra steps I need to go through for this. I need to do a contrast top stitch, which I'm going to do in red because the rest of my car has a red contrast top stitch, but that's not really part of this where and how to put a seam in. So we'll cover that in another video about different kinds of seaming and top stitching and finishing. For now, as far as operation, how do I figure out where to put a seam and then transfer that seam into material and have the material laying flat all over it? That's it. That's what we wanted to do. So that's your piece achieved. Hopefully, what that's helped you understand is that complex looking pieces actually generally aren't that much, and you don't need a lot of work or a really over the top process in order to get multiple bits of material put together to fit that pattern really nicely. And genuinely, the more that you do this, the easier it becomes. It's something that you can pick up quite quickly, and you'll very quickly go from doing very straight pieces and like flat pieces like dashboard panels to more complex things like these various pillar parts. And really, unless you're taking on something like a dashboard cluster, these pillars with these kind of one directional curves are about as difficult as it's going to get. You don't really have things that twist in and out and follow, you know, concave and convex faces and corners and stuff. This is about as difficult as it gets. So if you can do this that we've just done, then you can tackle pretty much any trim piece in any car, I reckon, with a little bit of practice. Hopefully, if this was a sticking point for you, or if you're just doing your research into how to do it for yourself, it's given you the confidence to attack it and just give it a go. If it is something you want to try, but you don't want to launch straight into your Alcantara or using your expensive materials, try to find a material that's similar weight and thickness to practice on. Something like a felt is good, something that doesn't stretch but has the similar kind of thickness. It's good to find something that works in a relatively similar way but is a lot less expensive. Felt is a really good one for that because it simulates a lot of the same properties. Obviously, if you want to know anything else about this process, or you want to know any details about any of the particular parts, stick them in the comments and I'll either get back to you, or maybe we'll make a video exploring some pieces in a bit more detail. Otherwise, let's take a look at these completed a couple of days from now and back in the 350Z. This is a new channel for us, so if you want to follow along with the projects that we're doing at the moment with our 350Z, or get lots more how-tos on particularly interior upholstery modifications and whatnot, make sure you hit that subscribe button, and if you want to like this video, it really does help us out. Whatever you do with the rest of your day, hope you have a wicked one, and we will see you in the next video. Take it easy, or bye-bye.